Welcome to the Carbon Copy podcast about big thinking local climate action. This mini-series, titled Civic Revolution, is a story about how we can change the climate of opinion, adapted from the original book and narrated by its author, Ric Casale. Chapter 4: Changing Direction. In the last episode, I shared some of the links that have been broken between people and places, past and present, imagination and reality, that have put us in jeopardy. However, today's circumstances are by no means inevitable. Narratives and the order of things can undergo astonishing transformations, despite their current dominance, and myths of their permanence. Such revolutions are not necessarily something we should fear either. Revolution can mean creation as well as collapse, can be about mending things that are already broken, and doing so in new and visionary ways. The further back you look in time, the further forward you're likely to see. So let's look for clues from our past that reveal how we might change our current direction, starting with a clue from 70,000 years ago. In our distant ancestral past, something occurred in the evolution of hominids that enabled one particular species, Homo sapiens, to become the most dominant species on Earth. Some anthropologists refer to a cognitive revolution that enabled early humans to build up knowledge so they could change their behavior without waiting for the change to be genetically encoded in their DNA. This evolutionary development is what divides us from other species and what divides our history from our biology. Decoupled from slow genetic changes to our DNA, we are able to make history by changing behaviors rapidly, incorporating socially and economically in extremely complex ways. Amazingly, although ironically we hardly think about it in this way, we have learned how to shape thoughts in each other's brains through language and with spoken and written words. This ability to communicate spans time and distance, as well as the barriers between strangers. The real power of this cognitive revolution is our ability to talk about things that are not real. As Professor Yuval Noah Harari elaborates in his book, Sapiens, ever since the cognitive revolution, Homo sapiens have been living in a dual reality. On the one hand, the objective reality of rivers, trees, and lions, and on the other hand, the imagined reality of gods, nations, and corporations. As time went by, the imagined reality became ever more powerful, so that today the very survival of rivers, trees, and lions depends on the grace of imagined entities such as the United States and Google. Incredibly, the cognitive revolution from over 70,000 years ago has given us the means to imagine an order that will destroy us, and equally to imagine a future that can sustain us. The powerful myths that shape our society and the choices we make today are nothing more or less than figments of our collective imagination, and they can be reimagined when enough of us choose to believe in a different narrative. Jumping from 70,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago, the first agricultural revolution marked the transition of society from roaming hunter-gatherer to more settled farming. This transformation occurred worldwide over millennia, starting in the Near East, where it's believed seasonal conditions at the end of the last ice age favored annual plants like wild cereals. Domestication of livestock occurred around the same time. Wild horses were domesticated later, around 6,000 years ago, on the grasslands of Ukraine and southwest Russia, before spreading across Europe and Asia. By domesticating cows and horses, our ancestors converted the muscle energy of animals into additional human power, used to help cultivate crops and to transport goods and people. What's clear in looking back at how people established settlements tied to the land is that this revolution sowed the seeds for the growth of communities as well as crops. How we choose to settle today and how we interact with the natural world remains as fundamental to our urban future as it did to our rural past. Fast forward in time to 400 years ago and the Scientific Revolution, a period in European history between Copernicus and Newton. Polish astronomer Nicolaus Copernicus upset the status quo by making the daring claim that the Earth moves. Not only did his claim go against common sense, after all, people felt no physical movement, but it also contradicted the authority and the orthodoxy of the Church. His viewpoint led more great thinkers to pursue other theories in mathematics and physics that also supported this new model, with Isaac Newton making the final link that joined the heavens and earth by uniting the stars and our planet under the same universal laws of motion. The long-term impact of the scientific revolution is the modern-day acceptance and dependence on science and evidence to explain the natural world and our place within it. From the 1700s onwards, the sun no longer orbited the Earth, and man was no longer the center of the universe. There are two things that we can take forward from that period. The first is that we should continue to view our place in this world with the same humility. And the second is that we should not go back to the truth-free past before the scientific revolution, when facts had less weight than the opinions of those in power. 250 years ago, the first industrial revolution began in Britain, converting energy from muscle power into machine power by mechanizing some of the tasks that were done laboriously by hand. The second industrial revolution, also known as the technological revolution, began in the late 19th century with the advent of electricity that converted this mechanical power into electrical power. It was a time of great imagination and full of inventions. Large-scale power stations enabled the operation of assembly lines for mass production. The introduction of public electricity led to widespread adoption of such inventions as the light bulb, telephone, and electric streetcars. The internal combustion engine was invented, powering a new mass-produced automobile industry. We also started to burn fossil fuels in a big way, increasing the concentrations of climate-warming greenhouse gases in our atmosphere dramatically. How we go about reducing these emissions will determine our future vulnerability. Over the last 200 years, a huge amount of political energy has been expended globally in creating nation-states, replacing former empires, kingdoms, and city-states. The establishment of territories as sovereign states that are central to the world order and international order today is a relatively new phenomenon. When the United States became a nation-state in 1784, there were around 20 other nation-states in the world. By 1945, that number had increased to almost 100. Today, there are over 190 sovereign states. Why did this happen? According to the research, it had little to do with the effects of industrialization and the increasing complexities of production and trade. Instead, the real force was based on the strength of civic institutions. For example, the success or failure of a political revolution would depend heavily on the structure of the local and regional institutions and on how much these legal, financial, and governing bodies went on to support the outcome of the revolution. In other words, successful nation-states were created from the will of the people locally and the support of their civic institutions. This finding is striking because it recognizes the actions of citizens in society as a powerful agent for change on a global scale. 50 years ago, the start of the digital revolution marked the beginning of the current information era. The development of semiconductors and microprocessors enabled the transfer of energy from mechanical technology to digital electronics. In those early days, the first mainframe computers were enormous room-sized metal boxes or frames, where computer bugs were literally insects that accidentally got inside and short-circuited the system. From mainframes to the handheld computers we use today, our smartphones and other devices with instant access to the World Wide Web, we now have almost limitless knowledge at our fingertips. At the same time as our daily lives have become saturated with social media, fake news, and online shopping. The digital revolution has given us an essential network for building a knowledge-based economy, but it's also created two challenges, a dilemma and a divide. The dilemma is how can we reap the social and economic benefits while reducing the online harms? The divide is between the digital haves and have-nots. Despite this divide, digital connectivity will undoubtedly continue to pull people together virtually and physically. Looking ahead, the implication of acting locally in a connected world is the potential to have more impact than ever before. Today, we are on the brink of what some people are calling the fourth industrial revolution, a disruption caused by the pervasive power of digitization and information technology. It's yet another big shift in how we use machines to interact with the world, from autonomous vehicles to artificial intelligence to implantable technologies. There are some profound changes on the horizon, with tipping points when these changes become mainstream estimated in years, not decades. And yet, despite these exciting breakthroughs, the world lacks a consistent, positive, and common narrative that outlines the opportunities and challenges of this fourth industrial revolution. We need only look at the hot debate around AI amid fears over the increasing pace of change and lack of control to see that if we don't know where we're going, we will get there much too fast. Chapter 5: Civic Revolution. All around us, shifts are taking place that indicate the way we live currently is already turning into history. We are past the final no of denial that we can keep on doing what we're doing. To quote a poem by Wallace Stevens, "After the final no, there comes a yes, and on that yes, the future world depends." Yes, we can change. There are many exciting new technologies that will catalyze this change, but the story of our time is not one of technology disruption, but of behavior disruption. The next revolution will be neither agricultural nor industrial, but civic. In other words, one that is place-based, where we and those around us are the ones who make things happen. In truth, we never lost our connection to place. A great many of us just forgot about this connection for a while. Our civic powers have atrophied to such an extent that we can hardly recall that we have this power. And yet, civic power boils down to the simple question of who decides. No one knows the place where you live better than you, so why should you let someone else make the decisions? It's interesting to note that patriotism applies to nations only, and not to the places where we live. There is no single word in the English language to express the sentiment of loving your town or city. Seemingly irrelevant to the serious business of state, the particulars are undervalued when there is a broader, abstract worldview to contemplate. This view is history. The UK is an anomaly. Of all the more economically developed democracies, our nation is one of the most centralized in the world. It's time this anachronistic centralist model changed, with more powers devolved to regions, cities, and local governments. Recent research by think tank New Local goes even further, finding that people look favorably on politicians with a commitment to increase community powers. In fact, most people would support a politician who championed this movement, and a large majority of people in the UK think that community powers should be politically committed to and legislated for. If there are any politicians listening, they should sit up and take note. Only recently, the COVID pandemic demonstrated the value of local community leaders and the role of councils in delivering for their communities. Local government's response to COVID was more flexible, effective, and responsive than aspects of the central government's response. In part because the wide range of social and economic factors are often only visible to those on the ground. Our collective sense of vulnerability has been awakened, here and in other countries, and people feel a greater collective need to be more resilient and resourceful locally. This feeling will only grow stronger as adapting to our changing climate is intensely place-based and locally led. A civic revolution in how we interact with each other in the places where we live will lead towards mending connections rather than breaking them, by creating a greater opportunity for people to shape the future of their local areas. We've covered a lot of ground in this episode. Looking back, our lightning tour of revolutions over the centuries has highlighted how we have repeatedly found and converted different forms of energy. We live by the stories we are told, and we reshape the world by the new stories we tell. We have seen how much local and national are interconnected, and not least, we see the dangers of moving ahead without common ground. Taken together, these clues from our past point towards an opportunity for people to play a bigger civic role in making the world around them better. Too many of us think that we don't have the option of changing direction or shaping the future. But the reality is that we do have this power at any point in time where we live. We just have to use it. And in the last episode, we will explore how. If you've enjoyed listening, send a link to this podcast to someone you think would like it. And if you haven't already, click follow this podcast wherever you're listening right now. Before you go, don't forget to visit carboncopy.eco and discover 1,000 inspiring climate action stories from around the UK.